Welcome to Research and Science Diaries. I am your host, Fune Cyprien. Today, we'll be looking at stress and burnout at the workplace. In our last episode, we discussed about stress and burnout in academia with a special focus on early career researchers. But today, let's look at stress and burnout at the workplace. Our guest and expert today is Professor Bert Schreurs, who is a work and organizational psychologist. He's also a professor of human resource and management at the Vrije University, Brussels, as well as the Solvay Business Schools in Brussels. Let's look at the causes of stress and burnout at the workplace and what employers and employees do to avoid a toxic working environment. Join us in this discussion and let's know your comments and your opinion in this comment section. Don't go away. See you on the other side. Welcome back. As mentioned, our focus today will be stress and burnout management in the workplace. Our expert and speaker today is Professor Bert Schreurs, who is a professor of human resources and management at the Vrije University, Brussels. He's also a professor at the Solvay Business School, also in Brussels. Professor, welcome to Research and Science Diaries.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Maybe you give us a bit of your background, things that I didn't cover in details.
Well, a little bit of background. So I actually started my career not as an academic, but as a consultant. Did some work in as a recruiter or test developer. Did some work as a public servant, working for the Belgian military, amongst others. Also test developing and being involved in research at the time on how applicants react to selection procedures. So that's where I actually got interested in research. So that's also where I did my PhD. So I did my PhD while I was working for the Belgian military, and then got one year grant by the Ministry of Defense. And after that, I decided that I wanted an academic career. Moved to Utrecht University, Maastricht University, and eventually kind of got a job at the VB.
Okay, thank you. I also found out that you are a co-founder of At Forum, as well as a partner at Vitamins. Can you give a brief of what these organizations do?
Yeah, so I think it was in 2007. I was at a kind of it was a difficult decision for me, either to pursue a career in as a consultant. So I founded my own company together with two friends, colleagues, and I really liked that practical side to it. But at the same time, I was kind of finishing my PhD, and I was really kind of interested in research and found it very hard to combine these two things. So at Forum at that point, it was a small startup, a consultancy firm, and I decided then to pursue an academic career instead. But since I want to do research that has practical value, I find it very important to be connected to industry and to practice. And so Vitamins is another firm that I co-founded. It's about measuring and monitoring well-being at work. I think it's a very important in today's workplace to kind of find and identify the causes of stress and burnout. That particular company has developed a tool to do that.
Indeed. So that is a lot of background, I would say. Why did you focus on stress and burnout? Why this area of research in psychology? Because there are other aspects of psychology that you could focus on. Why this particular area?
Well, so as mentioned, my PhD was actually on a different topic. It was on recruitment and selection and how applicants experience selection procedures. But then I moved to Utrecht University and I was part of a kind of a very prominent research group on burnout and engagement. And that's where I became interested. Also, I recognized many of these symptoms in colleagues and friends and family. So yeah, it is important. Also, the way that popular media talks about these phenomena, I find it a bit too simple. So there's much more to it. And so that's why I wanted to continue doing research in this area.
Yeah, that sounds very convincing, because I feel like stress at one point in our careers, we always find ourselves in this situation. But then before we dive into details of stress and burnout, what is, in simple terms, what is stress and what is burnout? And is there any difference between stress and burnout?
Yes, for sure. So it's important to make a distinction between a stressor and stress or strain. So stress and strain are actually synonyms, but it's different from a stressor. A stressor is the cause. So what is causing strain, like high levels of workload, or you're having a toxic leader, or you have conflicts with colleagues. These are all stressors, and you can kind of put up with it until a certain level. And then your body starts to feel stressed, kind of strain, levels of stress and mental energy that is disappearing. So straining energy, you feel like you don't care too much anymore about your work. So high levels of cynicism. You experience cognitive problems. So you cannot concentrate, and so those symptoms are actually indicating that you might heading towards a burnout. So, but to qualify for burnout diagnosis, you need to have these symptoms. So being exhausted, feeling cynical about your work, having cognitive problems, and actually also feeling incompetent for a longer period of time. Some scholars say that it is about 6 months. So it's not just feeling tired at the end of the day or for a week or for one or more months. It's really a prolonged period of time. So on the one hand, we have stressors, things at the workplace that are causing these feelings of strain and exhaustion. And if you have these negative feelings for a prolonged period of time, then okay, we can see that it might be a burnout.
Okay, thank you very much. When we talk about stress at the workplace, and we want to look about how we can prevent or avoid these situations at the workplace, who is the person responsible at the workplace? Is it the employer or the employee that are supposed to ensure that the workplace is free of this phenomenon?
I think this is the key question. So this is actually the single most important question to be asked. And I mean, because if you talk about burnout, oftentimes we finger point. It's like it's the individual employee is responsible.
Yeah.
I would say that it is a joint responsibility, but that the majority of responsibility, of accountability is for the employer. Why is that? Because about some researchers say about 70% of the differences in burnout affect how you can explain burnout. That has to do with factors that are work related, so not individual related, but the way that work is divided and things that we kind of the way the work is organized. And so who can change that? It is to some extent it is the employee, of course. Then you can think differently about your job, try to find meaning or increase your resilience or mindfulness. These things are very popular nowadays, but actually the biggest impact you can create by changing the workplace, giving employees more autonomy, organizing the work differently. And that is, of course, not something individual employees can do. That's management. Thinking about how can we divide labor differently. That's actually where
Yeah.
I
So
think.
yeah, because this is much in line with one of your articles that you publish on manager narcissism and employee silence. Because from the conclusion, it shows that, okay, like what you just said now, it means the employer takes more responsibility in ensuring that the workplace is friendly, void of stress and burnout. But in some cases, like you conclude from your paper, from your article, some employers take advantage of employees and bring in conditions that actually silence employees in such a way that they cannot actually advocate for a better working environment. Can you throw more light on this?
Yeah, so the article that you're referring to, it's not investigating who bears more responsibility. Yeah, it's actually about the impact of particular leadership trait and narcissism and the effects it has on followers. And so we did not include, for instance, employee characteristics or something. So it's really about this leader, and what we can conclude from this research is that if you experience your leader to be have high levels of narcissism, you start to distrust that person. I mean, that is not rocket science. What we actually found is that there are leaders who are particularly strong in hiding their true emotions, or appearing sincere or actually they're not. So you have narcissistic leaders who are very strong in pretending as if they are sincere. So that is a lethal combination, basically, what we're seeing. So narcissistic leaders, what they do is they undermine trust. And because we don't trust our leaders, yes, what we do, we don't speak up. We rather remain silent, and we don't share our concerns on how we can improve the organization. And eventually that will lead to spirals of silence where the entire workforce remains silent, and there are no new ideas, so no room for creativity.
Yeah. So given a situation like, okay, you are an employee, you're working with a manager who has this character, how can you manage a situation like this? How can employees speak out? How can they manage to get out of a situation with a manager as such?
Well, I would be very careful doing so. I think this is unfortunately a situation that can happen, and it has happened. I mean, since forever. I mean, it's not new whatsoever. It's risky to speak up. I mean, research is very it's very interesting line of research. What it shows is that actually employees who do speak up, they also tend to get promoted. But it remains risky. It remains risky. Sometimes you have a manager or a leader who doesn't appreciate it, and then it's better, of course, to not speak up. In general, it is recommendable to do so, but be very careful and try to assess the situation correctly, because otherwise it can be detrimental to your career. So there is no good advice. So it's really about assessing, appraising the situation, seeing who's my leader, is it risky or not. There's no easy solution.
Yeah, because indeed it's actually because I sometimes I feel like in most situations employees tend to say, okay, if I say something like you just mentioned, it could end up meaning you have the risk of losing your job or something like that, or maybe stagnation in promotions in the company and stuff. What are avenues in which employees can advocate for a better working environment in a company?
So again, I think it's first and foremost, it's the responsibility of the employer. So of course, if there are possibilities for you as an employee to speak up about the importance of well-being, then you should try to use those channels. There is a trend currently, companies using not so much performance reviews or kind of annual reviews where the focus is on employee performance, but rather well-being talks. And so where it's about really talking about person's health and well-being. And I think that is a good development, so that you shift focus from exclusively on performance to also include a focus on well-being. I think that is good. It all depends on your supervisor. So if you can create an atmosphere, a climate of trust, safety, psychological safety, and if you give the impression to, or if as an employee you have the impression that you can actually have impact, so safety and impact, if you have that, then you're probably also more likely to speak up. So without those impressions or those perceptions, it's unlikely that you will take action.
Yep. In a company or at the workplace, can motivation, some incentives, can they sort of prevent burnout at the workplace?
I doubt. So I mean, you're referring to monetary incentives.
That will be one of them, yes.
Yeah, so if it's monetary incentives, I doubt, although research also clearly shows that salaries not only have an instrumental function, they also have a symbolic function. So basically tells you how much you're appreciated in the firm. And appreciation, of course, is a very important psychological ingredient. So if people feel appreciated, recognized, they have some degree of freedom, and they feel competent, capable, then they have all the psychological nutrients or ingredients to feel healthy, happy, to flourish. So that's important. So in that respect, yes. So salary as a symbolic function, but just paying people more will not make them happier. That is not the case. So it is more a symbolic function that might have.
Yeah.
So much more important are the autonomy, the recognition that you get from your supervisor, from your colleagues, the fact that you are working in a team that there's a high level of cohesion and you feel at home in the company. Those are all more important aspects, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Is there a way that employees within a company can, I will try to rephrase this again in another way, because I think it's quite important. How can employees what avenues, again, how can they advocate for their well-being at the workplace, and as well as try to effectively communicate their needs to the employers? Because the workplace, like you also mentioned, it's about the working environment, how comfortable you feel with your employer or with your manager or with the team leader and stuff. How can employees advocate more? How can a working environment be established in a situation in a way that people are much more comfortable to open up, to talk to each other?
So I think there should be mechanisms in place, and most companies, if they have a kind of a developed HR architecture, there are possibilities to talk to your supervisor and to express your needs. So that is a set the emphasis is shifting a little bit from the yearly or 6 monthly performance review to also be able to express your needs in terms of well-being. Now, most companies are well aware, most managers are well aware that what are the conditions, work-related conditions needed to have a workforce that thrives and that flourishes. I mean, it is well known that providing autonomy to your employees and to make them feel recognized and at home, that this will create or promote the conditions necessary for employees to feel healthy. So I'm not sure whether this is up to the individual employee to highlight this. I mean, this is something, again, it relates a bit to our discussion that we had before. Who's responsible? I think it's not the individual employee, it's the employer. It's the employer. So this is something in the narrative and the rhetoric seems to suggest that it is up to the employee to go to management and to tell them about their needs. Well, I would find this a little bit unfortunate if this were the case. I think it should be the other way around. Like it's management that should be aware. See what I mean?
Yeah, yes, I I totally agree. Because this takes me to the next question, because that I'll consider that as one of the red flags to say a workplace is turning into turning into a toxic culture. So what are some, in addition to this, in addition to employers not taking their responsibility in establishing a friendly working environment, what are other red flags that employers or employees can look into to say that maybe the workplace is turning into a more toxic culture, which can lead to burnout or stress on employees and probably maybe some leaders as well?
Actually, it's a tricky question, because well-being, as mentioned, it's partly individual. It's mostly about the structure of the company, structure that is then translated into a particular design, a work design, the way that our job is organized. So you might have freedom to do your job in the way that you want to, whereas that is not the case for someone else. So that's why some jobs, by definition, are more stressful than others. So like if you are a factory worker, you have less autonomy in deciding how to do your work than, for instance, if you're a professor and can decide to do an interview or not, or to write a paper and when to write a paper. I mean, you have much more degrees of freedom. So it's by design that some jobs are more stressful than others. So what are red flags? I think some occupations, like a nurse, for instance, nurses, and so they are confronted with patients, they have to control regulate their emotions. It's by definition the case that these jobs are more stressful, so that you cannot change too much as a company. Yeah. But of course, there are companies that are less concerned about the employee well-being than others, and that might have to do with the strategy, the company strategy. So some companies, for instance, that are mostly concerned about financial resources or material resources, or they have a very strong reputation, brand, well, they might care less about human resources. So it is not the case that every company cares about human resources to the same extent. And these factors are oftentimes ignored. So to what extent are human resources important to kind of realize, to accomplish the company's strategy? So that's why, what are red flags? I think it depends very much from industry to industry, very much depends from organization to organization, and from occupation to occupation. But as mentioned, what you basically strive for, what you want as an employee, is high levels of autonomy. You want high levels of autonomy, degrees of freedom, deciding how, when, and where to do your job. You want nice colleagues, a nice atmosphere. You want to be recognized and also be appreciated. And if you can tick all these boxes, then you're good. Then you're good.
Yeah, as well as offering opportunities for more training or for personal development. This also, I quickly picked this on your social media post on how companies can keep their employees on board. You did mention, I think it was, I think you had a workshop or a lecture at school recently, and I did pick this. You mentioned to keep employees on board, companies should focus on developing employees rather than trying to find candidates who fit in the job perfectly. Employees and jobs are not static and change. Uh, this goes to say, what I want to follow up on this is, can employees create more friendly environment by employing or bringing in talents that are flexible, that will fit into the company?
Yeah, so you mean whether employers can do that?
Yes.
So yeah, so my
Kind of talent acquisition rather than focusing on, because that's another thing, is like, okay, you see a job advert, they're asking for 20 years of experience, you have to do this. Can they change the mindset? Because your approach, the way you propose it is, it's better to get someone, give them the opportunity, and somebody who is also flexible, who grows in the company.
yes,
Can
yeah.
this change the level of stress and toxicity that can exist within a company? Can this kind of be like a panacea to some
Yeah.
of these challenges?
Yeah, so it was actually not me who said this. It was a colleague who gave a guest lecture, and
Yeah.
I think that the key message is that we have been for a long time when there was actually lots of supply on the labor market, so that we have been focusing on selection, on finding that that excellent candidate that ticks all the boxes. It's kind of
Yeah.
the perfect fit to the job. And unfortunately, that situation has long gone. It is tight labor market, and it will remain tight for many years to come. And I think this is important for companies and employers to realize that they have to change their approach. Otherwise, they will run into difficulty. Of course, again, it depends from industry to industry, but still, in general, I think this is going to happen. So we will continue to struggle to find the perfect candidate. So that
Yeah.
doesn't long. So why not think about talent acquisition and talent development differently? And instead of finding the perfect candidate, find someone who fits the values of the company and who's really willing to learn and develop and to grow together with the company. Why is that? Because we as individuals, we change, we develop. You're not the same person as you were 10 years ago. Neither am I. No, that's part of life. Yeah. So you develop, you change.
Yeah.
But jobs also change. Yeah? So my job is completely different than it was 10 years ago. So the writing has changed. Social media has become more important. There's now artificial intelligence that will have a huge impact on how we do our jobs. So then it's much more kind of, I think, efficient to choose and hire persons. And maybe it's certainly not a lifetime employment. It can be a journey that continues for some years, and then you depart, and then maybe that person comes back after a while. So it is a completely different mindset. And I think if you approach recruitment, selection, development in this way, it might also have positive effects for people's well-being. So it's not the need to do your job perfect at all times. There's room for improvement and for development.
Yeah. Let's get to the individual level. Are there some mindfulness habits or some self-care practices that employees or individuals can incorporate in their daily life to prevent getting into a situation of burnout?
So I am rather critical about those practices. I think they might be helpful to some. But as mentioned, the majority of the factors that explain burnout are due to workplace-related factors, not to individual characteristics.
It's based on the environment, not actually the individual.
Yes, of course, but there is some I mean, there are individual differences, and some people are able to better cope with stressors than others. So that's definitely true. But I think it's an easy way out for companies to only focus on those things. So you can offer those kind of trainings, coachings, and it might be effective in some situations, but the majority of the gains to be made are really in changing the workplace and the conditions.
Yeah. Okay. Are there some effective ways that companies can track their progress? How they tend to eliminate stress and burnout at the workplace? I mean, like, how can they track their initiatives in which they want to eliminate stress and burnout? And are there some particular metrics or indicators that companies can use to track this to see their effectiveness?
So I think you're referring to interventions and
Yes.
to see whether they're effective or not. So what I would recommend companies is to monitor levels of stress or ill-being, but of course also the positive side, because it's not all negative. You have, the flip side is of course employee engagement. There are definitely many employees who want to work and who are really they look forward to going to the office and to work together with colleagues. So it's not all negative. That's clearly highlight this, because otherwise it's a very negative story, and it's not all that negative. So you have well-being, the positive side, and you have ill-being, it's the negative side.
Yeah.
And I would recommend companies to monitor that on a regular basis. And if they then do an intervention, for instance, they want to restructure the workplace, so they can measure these levels of well-being and ill-being before the intervention and after, and see if there is a change. I mean, there are different ways to do that, but measuring, of course, if you do this regularly, you need to make sure that you act upon the results, because otherwise employees will stop filling out these surveys.
Yeah.
So that's important.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
You can also think about more qualitative approach, where you do some focus groups, or you try to listen. Actually, that's what you do. You try to listen to your employees, and different ways to do that. Some are more quantitative, others are more qualitative. But if you tell your employees that you want to listen, you need to act upon the results, because otherwise they will not speak up.
Yeah. Thank you very much. How can you let's look at the from for the past decades, generational changes from pre-millennial to millennial, and now Generation Z. How have you seen the shift in work culture from we have the traditional 5-week day to a more flexible hybrid on-site, off-site, and as well as some people are even trying to implement a 4-day work week. How do you look at this, and how do you think this shift influences the attitude towards work and life balance?
No, I'm not a big fan of generational differences, because it's more like age related than it's perhaps generational differences. But of course, we are all impacted by, for instance, technology changes.
Yeah.
As mentioned, artificial intelligence will have a big impact, and it will impact not only the younger generation, it will also impact the older ones. So yes, there are trends happening, and COVID has kind of served as an accelerator of some of these trends. Working from home being one of them. So that will not change. That will not change. I don't see it changing. So I think then the question is how to deal with that as an employer.
Because the follow-up question was, how do you think what are the implications for employers and employees?
It has quite a bit of implications. So if you think about HR and evaluating performance, for instance. How do we do that? And before and after COVID, it might have changed completely because you can't monitor or see your employees that regularly. So we're probably shifting toward a kind of results-only work environment where we are more likely to evaluate employees based on the outcomes of their work rather than on their actual behavior. And I think that that might be the best possible outcome because you have other companies who try still to control, to micromanage employees' behavior by all kinds of software to see whether they're online or tracking even what they're doing on their laptop. Yeah. So that is I think a counterproductive trend. So I think it's better to start with trust and then to evaluate employees based on the results rather than on their behavior because you cannot observe them so frequently. So that's one particular thing that might happen. What with regard to the 4-day work week, it might reflect that our attitudes toward work are changing. I don't know if that is the case. I think we need more research, good research to see whether that is actually true and whether that is only in the younger generation and not so much in the older one. I don't believe too much in that generational thinking. But then again, we need to be very careful. 4-day work week, does it mean that we are going to work less in total, or is it that we work the same number of hours but more packed 4 days? And is that then better for an employee because he or she will have less time to recover? And there are good studies in different industries where people have to do night shifts or work long hours. And you can see if you don't get that recovery time, it might, in the long run, it might be actually detrimental to people's health. Yeah. So it's a nuanced debate, and I don't think they're easy answers.
Yeah, I think it's quite the future, but it also has a lot of things that it will put in place because we could also be thinking of aspects or some situations where what about employers or employees who cannot work from home? Their jobs require them to be on site. How will you motivate them? How will you differentiate the salaries between these? So I think actually there are a lot of things to really reconsider to put them in place. I thank you very much, Professor Bert. Let's go to some personal questions related to you. Can you share with us, with our listeners, more of your some mentorship or support system that you have used throughout your career that has really been pushing you forward?
I think I have a rather atypical career because I changed careers from a consultant and starting my own business, becoming an academic, and still very much concerned about having some societal impact. And I've been struggling with that throughout my entire career. I met a couple of very inspiring people who at some point in my career, they gave me advice, intended or unsolicited, and that has helped me to make specific decisions. But mentoring as such, and I didn't really use a mentoring system or buddy system in a very formal way. We now try to put it in place in our own research group, and I see research. I know about research that shows the positive effects. So I think formal mentoring system has positive effects, but there's especially this informal mentoring and having a network that supports you. That's important. So knowing and being able to reach out to people at some point in your career, that's important. And it's more informal, I think, for me in my case, than formal.
Do you have a favorite quote or book or resource that inspire you in your professional life?
So No, not necessarily. I've read many books, and I think, but I don't have one favorite one. A quote. No, some things that actually has kept me uh, thinking and recognize in many situations is that from kind of a distance, things oftentimes look kind of easy, understandable, but the more you get to know about things, the more complex it becomes. And so that is what I've learned. Oftentimes people talk about things in a very black and white manner, but as soon as you start to delve into it, it becomes much more nuanced. And that's also what I try to teach my students, that things are oftentimes not as simple, but unfortunately we tend to polarize things and think about things in a very unnuanced manner. So that is uh, certainly something that I always try to teach my students. I say it depends. It depends, but of course that is not enough. You need then to explain what it depends on. that is important. Yeah. So that is what I actually would say.
So, out of the box question, what has been the most happiest moment in your life?
Most happiest moment. Wow. Work related or personal?
Professionally.
Professional. Oh, I'm not sure. I don't feel kind of this feeling of happiness is you try
A
to think
feeling of,
about that.
yeah, let's say fulfillment, like you feel fulfilled.
That's easier because happiness it's very momentarily. So when you get a, I remember my first publication. Publication. That was a moment of happiness. I said to my partner, "Well, this is the moment that we drink a glass of champagne, and this is the best moment ever." And then you continue to publish, and then it fades away. Like, okay, you get used to it. So that's not really happiness. So I'm kind of grateful for the opportunities that I got. Grateful. Many people in my that I met during my career that in one way or another have helped me. They helped me in making decisions and informally mentoring. My supervisor, for instance, he gave me advice by asking questions. I found this very powerful. So instead of saying you have to do this or that, he asked me questions. So making me think about what is the right decision, because there's no right or wrong, actually. It's just you make decisions with different consequences, but there's no right or wrong. And I think that is true for many of us. We have a career and we can only kind of, by looking back at, that's what Mintzberg also said. It's you see your strategy. Strategy is not something you think about beforehand and then you execute it. It's just by looking back. In retrospect, things become clear.
Yep.
And that's also how I experienced my career. Many moments for which I'm very grateful. But happiness, yeah, it's not. It happens, but it's very momentary.
You are a true psychology specialist. Happiness is not.
Yeah, it's more about fulfillment.
Yes. So, do you have some final words on final advice on stress and burnout management at the workplace?
So, as an employee, I would be very attentive to your own levels of well-being or ill-being. So be attentive if you feel exhausted, if you start to feel cynical about your work, if you feel incompetent and you experience all kinds of cognitive problems, that's a red flag. That's alarming, and you need to make sure that you take sufficient time to recover. Try to make or do things during your career in your job that gives these feelings of fulfillment, rather than striving for happiness every day. It's this fulfillment, this level feeling of appreciation, and you're free to change careers. You're not married with your job. You can change your careers, and so we're living in a free world. So that's basically what I would say.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Professor Bert, and thank you for sharing your experience with us.
You're very welcome. Yeah,
we hope to talk to you again in the future. Thank you very much.
Okay. You're welcome. You're welcome.